The question is, what is more important, the Torah or the Jewish people? And it's a debate that probably appears in many, many places. And over the course of this week, we're going to take an angle on this debate, which is an incredibly unusual angle. So to get there, first we have to learn a few fairly technical things about the structure of a particular element of the Mishkan, which relates to this week's parasha. So we're going to spend a bit of time unpacking the rules around this particular element of the Mishkan, and then based on that, eventually come back to the question, so which one is more central or more valuable to Hashem's plan for creation, the Jewish people or the Torah? So if I had to speak about the Torah and speak about the Mishkan, which element of the Mishkan would you naturally associate with the Torah? And many, many components, obviously, of the Mishkan, right? So which one would you most naturally associate with the Torah? The Ark. Makes the most sense, right? Because the Ark had inside it the luchos, the tablets, which is, in a sense, the whole of the Torah condensed into its most original form. And a description of creating, of fashioning the Ark is in this week's parasha. In fact, it's right at the beginning of this week's parasha. So just for context, the Torah tells us, make for me a Mishkan. That's the general instruction, which refers to the whole Mishkan. And then, after it tells us to build the Mishkan, it says specifically you have to make certain elements. And the first element that we're told to make is the Aron, is the Ark. So if you actually had to look at the chronology goes like this. First, Hashem says, take a truma, a donation. Then it says, make a mikdash. And then it goes into the details of the elements of the Mishkan, the structure of the Mishkan, and eventually the uniforms that the Kohanim had to wear when they worked in the Mishkan. But right now we're at the point where we're describing the actual construction of the Mishkan. The first element in the Mishkan is the Aron, the Ark. Now, the Torah tells us not only how to make the Ark, what materials to use, what size it has to be, and eventually where it's going to go, but the Torah also tells us what belongs inside the Ark. V'nosata el ha'aron. The Torah tells us you should place inside the Ark es ha'edus, the testimony, which refers to the luchos. We actually often, outside of this, we refer to them as luchos ha'edus, which is not how they're normally translated. They're normally translated as the tablets. Some people say the tablets of the law, but edus actually means testimony. So these are the tablets that give testimony to the fact that Hashem instructed us to follow the various laws of the Torah. That's really what the tablets are all about. So v'nosata el ha'aron, you place into the Ark these luchos, these tablets which Hashem has given to you. Okay, so what does the Ark look like?
A wooden box with gold around.
Okay, so you've got to be very careful how you describe it. But that is correct. So it's effectively a box. The truth of the matter is, we're going to see, Rashi is going to tell us, it's actually 3 boxes. So there's a golden box that is inserted inside a wooden box that is inserted inside a golden box. That's the design of the Ark. Okay, what else do we know about the design of the Ark?
There's 2 cherubim.
So before you get there, let's go, so to speak, from the bottom up. So do the boxes sit on the floor? It has stands, right? It stands on legs. Okay, what else do we know about the Ark?
Protruding pieces at the top.
That's before we get there. What else do we know about the Ark?
It's got a gold rim.
It has what's called a zer. It has a gold rim around it. We'll have to see exactly where that gold rim belongs. And it's got poles. A key component. It's got rings, and there are poles that go through those rings in order to be able to carry the Ark. And there's a halacha, which is not relevant to what we're discussing today, but it's just because we're describing what the Ark looks like, that you're never allowed to remove those poles, even at a time when the Ark is stationary, so the poles don't really have a purpose. You're not allowed to remove them. Okay, now, what's on top of the Ark?
It was a lid with the 2 cherubim.
Exactly. So it has a name. That lid with the 2 cherubic images, what we call the keruvim, that has a name. It's called the kapoires. And the kapoires has to be quite thick. It's a thick piece of gold. Plus the keruvim, which are these 2 little angelic figures that sit on top of it with their wings extended, they actually have to be hammered out of a single piece of gold. They can't be welded on afterwards. So initially it would have been quite a big piece of gold that was then fashioned into this very unique kind of design, and then that was put on top of the ark. Okay, so we've got the ark and we've got the cover that goes on top of the ark. That's where things start to get sticky. Is the ark including or excluding the kaporos on top of it? In other words, is the lid the final piece that makes the ark into the ark? Or is the ark one thing and the lid with the keruvim something independent that goes on top of it? Okay, that's the question that we're going to have to unpack.
Sorry, Rabbi. So they made this box, as it were, for lack of a better word, and then they put the luchot from the top,
Yes, correct.
and then they put the lid.
Correct, exactly. And that's why it's saying v'nosata el ha'aron, that you put the tablets into the ark, implying exactly that it's open at the top. You put the tablets in from the top, and then you cover it with a lid. Now, when you want to understand what's going on in the Torah, the first place you typically will look is Rashi's commentary, because Rashi gives us the most simple insights into what the storyline is and what the Torah is telling us. That's where you begin. Rashi says the fact that the verse uses that expression, v'nasata el ha'aron, that you can place inside the ark these tablets, that obviously tells me that at that point the ark is open. Otherwise, how else would you get the tablets in? And the fact that it's open does not stop the Torah from calling it the ark. Therefore, Rashi's view is that the ark is independent of the cover. The cover is a separate piece. Okay, it's a separate piece. One piece is called the ark, which is the box with the stand, with the poles, and in fact it's 3 different boxes. That's called the ark. And then there is another different piece, which is called the cover, and the cover then has to be placed on the ark at some later point. Okay, makes sense, because the Torah is saying, put the tablets into the ark before there's a cover. But there are other commentaries on the Torah. Rashi is not the only commentary on the Torah. And amongst the other commentaries on the Torah, different commentators take different perspectives. So there are a group of commentators who are called the Pashtonim. That means to say that they are also looking to give us the simplest understanding of the verse. One of them is the Ramban, Rabbi Moshe ben Nachman, not to be confused with the Rambam. The Ramban takes a different view. The Ramban's view is that the ark is an entity that is made out of different pieces. In other words, it's made, for example, out of 3 boxes. There's a gold box inserted inside a wood box, inserted inside a gold box. So that means there are 3 different pieces. Only when you put them all together, then you have an ark. And if you have an ark without the poles, that's also not an ark. So the Ramban's view is that it's like almost like a Lego. There's different pieces that you have to put together, and only when you have all of the pieces, then you have an ark. So, in the Ramban's view, the ark is not an ark until it has the lid on it. So the lid is not separate, it's not another component, it's not another element of the Mishkan, it is part of the ark. Okay, so this is the debate between Rashi and the Ramban, whether an ark is with or without a lid, or to put it differently, whether the lid, the kaporos, the cover of the ark, has its own identity. Okay, that's the debate between them. Now, at this point in time, you could have a look at this and you could say, listen, that sounds highly technical, and what's the difference? Does it really make a difference? Like, what's the difference practically? If it's at the end of the day, it's going to look the same, regardless of how you do it, regardless of how you split hairs. At the end of the day, the ark will always have a cover on it. That's for sure. So what's the difference? If you take this angle, you take that angle. If you say it is 2 separate things, if you say it's not 2 separate things, what's the difference? Okay? So let's try and see if we could work out any technical differences depending which halachic perspective you take. For example, okay, and this is not necessarily in any specific order, but for example, When you are involved in a mitzvah, generally speaking, you have to be focused. You have to be intentional about the mitzvah. Now, that's generally true, but when it comes to something which is holy, meaning to say it's not just a mitzvah, but it's something which serves a very central holy purpose, then it becomes really important that you have the right intentions. For example, when a person ties a pair of tzitzis, I don't know if you've ever done this. When you tie a pair of tzitzis, there are a number of knots that you have to, so you thread the strings and then you have to tie the knots. When you tie the knots, you're supposed to actually say, L'shem mitzvahs tzitzis. I'm doing this for the purpose of the mitzvah of tzitzis. Or when a person is going to write, let's say, a pair of tefillin, or a mezuzah, or a Torah scroll, then they have to say, L'shem kedushas sefer Torah, for example. This is for the purpose of the sanctity of the Torah scroll. Another example, let's say that a person brings a sacrifice. Now, when a person brings a sacrifice, they have to have intention. There's a whole series of intentions they have to have. They have to have the intention, because the Kohen is bringing the sacrifice on behalf of the individual, right? The individual brings it to a point, and then the Kohen has to take over. So the Kohen now has to have a whole series of intentions. He has to have in mind that he's bringing it for so-and-so. He has to have in mind that it's to be a sacrifice to Hashem, not for any other purpose. And then he has to have in mind which particular sacrifice it is. Is it the oila burnt offering? Is it the chatas sin offering, etc.? And if he messes up and he doesn't have the right intentions, well, depending on the circumstances, it might disqualify the whole sacrifice, and the person may have to bring a new one. So intentions are quite important in certain circumstances. And one of those circumstances is when you're building Hashem's Mishkan. There you have to build a Mishkan with intention. In fact, that's even one of the interpretations of the verse that says, Va'asu li mikdash. Hashem says, make for me a sanctuary. That li means lishmi. You have to have in mind that the reason you're making it is for Hashem. So now, let's say that you're the craftsman who's busy making the kaporos, the cover that goes on top of the ark. According to Rashi, when you make that cover, your intention has to be that you're making the cover, the kaporos. And if you had in mind that you're making the ark, that's the wrong intention, because according to Rashi, they're two separate entities. Whereas, if you had to go with the view of the Ramban, who says that the kaporos is merely just the cover of the ark, it's not its own independent thing, it's part of the ark, well, in that case, all you have to do is have in mind that you're making the ark, and you're good. So that's just like one practical difference, depending whether you consider the kaporos to be part of the ark or not part of the ark. Here's another one that's maybe even a little bit more technical. Okay? There are basically two kinds of elements to the Mishkan. Let's say, for example, the walls, because in order to create the structure of the Mishkan, you had to make the walls. Are the walls ever used for any ritual in the Mishkan's day-to-day service? They're not. They're just there as the walls, right? Whereas, let's say, the menorah is used in a ritual every single day. You have to light the lamps of the menorah every single day. So it's part of a ritual, right? Okay? Now, we have a name for that. We have a name. Any element that belongs to the Mishkan, that is part of the ritualistic service in the Mishkan, that's what we call a kli shares. Kli means a vessel. Shares means to serve. So it's a vessel that is used to serve Hashem. Now, halachically, if something is a kli shares, if it's a vessel that is used to serve Hashem, obviously it's used on our behalf. In other words, when the Kohen goes up to light the menorah, it's not his personal thing. He's not doing a personal mitzvah. He is our representative. And therefore, when he lights the menorah, he does so on behalf of the entire community. Therefore, if something is a kli shares, it has to be paid for using communal funds, first of all, because it has to belong to all of us, because we all have to participate in this particular ritual. Number two, it cannot carry the name of an individual. In other words, you can't say, this is the menorah designed by so-and-so, the artist. Can't do that. You could do that if you want to put it in a museum. But inside the Mishkan, if the menorah is the property of the entire Jewish community, then it cannot be referred to with an individual name. Now, is the Aron, is the Ark used in any ritualistic service in the Mishkan. No, the ark just stays where it is. We don't use it in any part of the daily service. Fascinating, because it's the epicenter of the whole Mishkan. So you would think, naturally, that it's very much part of how we do the service. But actually it's not. It sits there. It's got a role to play, and we'll get to what that role is. But the role is not part of the service. The kaporos, on the other hand, which is the cover that sits on top, is used as part of the service once a year. What's once a year?
Yom Kippur.
Yom Kippur. What happens on Yom Kippur?
Hashem speaks.
No, speaks is not only on Yom Kippur. What happens only on Yom Kippur? What happens only on Yom Kippur? No, what happens only on Yom Kippur?
Fast.
What happens only on Yom Kippur in the Mishkan and the Beis Hamikdash?
We get blessed.
The Kohen Gadol goes into the Holy of Holies. Only happens once a year. Once a year, the Kohen Gadol goes into the Holy of Holies, right? And when he's in the Holy of Holies, which he does multiple times during the course of the day, there are two types of service that he has to do inside the Holy of Holies. The most famous is he takes the Torah, which is incense, takes it into the Holy of Holies. That's the one that's stated in the beginning of the Torah, telling us about the ritual of Yom Kippur. But the other thing that he has to do is he has to take blood from sacrifices that he brought on behalf of the community. He has to take that blood and he has to spray it onto the cover of the ark. So once a year, the cover of the ark is part of a ritual that is done on behalf of the whole Jewish community. Now, what's the rule? If you have a vessel that is used for a process, for a service, for a ritualistic service of Hashem, that represents the whole community, then what did we say? It has to come from communal funds, and no individual can attach their name to that particular Kli Shoretz. Now, if you have a look in the Torah, when it comes to the design of the ark, the Torah tells us specifically, Betzalel, who was the architect of the Mishkan, made the ark. That's what it says. So is that implying that he is the artist, the craftsman, the architect of the ark? Or is just telling us a technical reality that he's the one who physically did it? Depends which opinion you go with. Because if you take the view of Rashi, where the ark and the kaporos are separate, then the fact that the kaporos was used in ritualistic service means the kaporos cannot be linked to somebody and their personal name. Whereas the ark, which is separate and not used in a ritualistic service, can have somebody's name attached to it, but Tzalel makes the ark. Whereas if you go with the Ramban's opinion, that says that the lid and the ark are all one thing, then the minute you spray the blood towards the cover, which means the ark, you can no longer attach a personal name to the ark. Okay? So you see there are practical differences depending on which view you take as to, how this whole aspect of the Beis HaMikdash, or in this case the Mishkan, how it works. Now that's fascinating because it illustrates to us that any time that there are differences of views in the Torah, we have to obviously understand why they have these different views, which we're still going to look at, but we also have to recognize that they will have practical applications. The fact that there's a difference between them is going to have a practical application. In this particular case, the difference between Rashi and the Ramban, we've looked at various practical applications, the difference between their two views of whether the kaporos is part of the ark or not is going to really boil down to how they understand what the role is of this kaporos. Because the first thing that would come to your mind is that it's there to finish the piece. You can't have the ark sitting there open. Surely it's got to have some kind of a lid, both from an aesthetic point of view, that it shouldn't just look half finished, and from a practical point of view, because it would create protection for the luchos, for the tablets that are inside. So in our minds, it makes perfect sense that there should be this lid on top of the ark. But just because we understand the lid on top of the ark in that context does not actually mean that's why there's a lid on top of the ark. There must be another, possibly deeper reason behind it. And so what we're going to discover is that Rashi and the Ramban take different views as to whether the kaporos and the ark are a single unit or not, because they have different views of what the role of the ark and what the role of the kaporos is. Specifically, the role of the kaporos. That's where you're going to see the biggest difference of view between the Ramban and Rashi. Is what exactly is this role of the kaporos? Why was it put there in the first place? When you understand the role, then you can understand whether or not it makes more sense to be part of the ark or independent of the ark. Once you understand that, then we'll use that as a segue into a conversation about what the ark represents and what the kaporos represents in terms of our relationship with Hashem. So first we've got to understand where the Ramban and Rashi are coming from in terms of what the role of the kaporos is, and then we can extrapolate that out to say, well, obviously this is a very important part of the Mishkan. The purpose of the Mishkan is for us to have a relationship with Hashem, so therefore depending on how you see these different components will give you different views on what kind of a relationship we have with Hashem, or how deep that relationship goes, or what is required in order for us to have that relationship with Hashem. So to get there, the next thing we have to do is work out how Rashi and the Ramban understand the role of the kaporos, which incidentally will also speak about the role of the ark itself. To be continued.
Yeah.